Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first session of the GRADS Science Collaboration series. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm very pleased to say that today we're joined not only by our GRADS alumni network, but also from awardees from our partner networks from Maxur in Germany and the BCC scholarship. My name is Ekaterina Besanova. I am going to be hosting this event today, and I also work as one of the coordinators of the GRADS program. So before we begin, or before we dive into the agenda, let's actually go through it first. So what's going to happen is my colleague Sinira will provide an overview of the GRADS program for those who don't know what it is, and for those who are joining us from our partner scholarship. I will then give an overview of the webinar series, which will take place over the 2022, and then we will give the floor to our keynote speaker for today, Johnathan Schwabish, who will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we will have plenty of time for questions to Johnathan and discussions, and then we will close and say our goodbyes. So don't forget this. This is a webinar, so prepare your questions or start asking them when they come to you in the Q&A, and also feel free to choose the chat to use the chat for any other discussions and introductions. So Sinira, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ekaterina. Let me share my screen quickly. So as full mode, can you see my screen, Ekaterina? Can you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good, thanks. So thanks for the introduction. So my name is Sinira Costa Jr. I work for the CCAPS on Low Emissions Development Flagship. And I'm here to present to you the basic information about the GRADS and a few resources that we have available for supporting the GRADS students throughout their journeys under the program. So the GRADS is a joint initiative of the Climate, Food and Farming Network from CCAPS and the GRADS, the GRA, the Global Research Alliance Development Scholarships. So over the last few years, we merged these two initiatives to make the GRADS. And the purpose of the program is basically to support PhD students and early career scientists, essentially from developing countries or the global south, to conduct research in another country, another institution, with a focus on the quantification of emissions and mitigation in agriculture and food systems, right? So the idea is also to foster a network of young professionals and also to improve the data on these mitigation and emissions of agriculture and food systems, especially from developing countries, as I said, where data lack mostly, right? So basically, the program grant students with fellowships of approximately 10,000 USA dollars for a 6-month internship or a fellowship program. We target and we seek that at least half or 50% of these fellowships are directed to women, with, again, research focused on all agriculture subsectors related to emissions and mitigation, farm emissions, and sometimes special topics such as food loss and waste emissions. The program organizes workshops, webinars, and also participation of students in global events. We also foster the networking of these young with leading scientists in their respective field of work, and also policymakers. We also promote a kind of students interaction throughout this 6 months and beyond, through WhatsApp. We have Lumio, where we often post job opportunities or grant opportunities and this kind of information. So the program was established in 2011 and the GRA joined in 2017. So it's basically funded by the GRA, the CCAF or the CGIAR Trust Fund, and for special occasions, USAID. Here are some numbers on the outcomes of the program from 2011 to 2021. So to date, the program has supported over 100 students, 50% women, as I said, from 20 plus developing countries. And we ran an impact survey in 2019, and we got very interesting numbers out of the Cliff GRADS students. So basically over 90% of these students said that they deepened their understanding on climate change mitigation in agriculture, built new partnerships, learned new techniques for measuring and accessing GHG emissions and mitigation options, carbon sequestration, improved the quality of their research, and used or improved research methodology and tools. Here is a map that shows where 2019 students came from. So you can see here 19 countries across the globe, especially in the global south. And here is a picture of the 2019 students of the last in-person workshop we had before COVID in Bali, Indonesia. And here are a few resources that I would like to present to you that is available for students, basically to help them in developing their research and improve their capability to access emissions and mitigation options in agriculture and food systems, right? So we have samples, the food loss and waste calculator, the Ag MRV platform, and the GRA library, basically. So basically these resources, they work or they provide data for the development and implementation of emission factors in MRV systems or monitoring, reporting, and verification systems of emissions and mitigation options. So samples is basically a repository of cost-effective guidelines for measuring GHG emissions and removals from agriculture systems. So there we have, for example, a database with tier 2 level emission factors from agriculture research around the globe. And we also have here the measurement methods, a guideline that can support and help anyone interested in measuring emissions and mitigation options on the ground and modeling these emissions if they willing to. The Ag MRV website, as the name says, it's more directed to in the implementation of systems to measure, report, and verify emissions and mitigation options. It has a focus on smallholders, and to date, we have MRV systems that can be applicable to livestock, rice, soil, agroforestry, food loss and waste, and several other value chains as a focus to date. And it's constantly being updated with other resources, tools, and systems for MRV emissions and mitigation options. The next one is the food loss and waste calculator. So it's basically a calculator to estimate emissions from food loss and waste. So it provides a large database on several crops and livestock systems, where you can estimate emissions and mitigation options by improving or reducing food loss and waste across the value chain of several agriculture value chains, as I said. That's the most recent resource that we put out there. That is the low emissions development, or LED MRV, or LED MRV. So it's basically it provides several resources. Sorry, LAD. So provide a series of resources and explainers on low emissions development, according to, or basically, 3 pillars. One is the emissions and LAD options. The other is estimating emissions, and lastly, policy and planning. So you can find a lot on these 3 topics there. And lastly, we have the GRA library, where you can find, again, several other resources to complement the others that I presented to you previously. And they are all worth checking. That I'm pretty sure that these resources can help you throughout your Cliff GRADS moment or research going forward. So Katrina, I stop there. Thank you so much, and back to you.
Thank you, Senor. I'm sure our participants has found this very useful. I will just run through the webinar series. Let me just share my screen. So as I said, this is the first introductory session of the science collaboration series that we designed for you to learn more about science communication, and to also have a deep dive into the science and policy interface that surrounds the nationally determined contributions and their process, and also provide insight into how large scientific, international, and often when we're dealing with climate change, multicultural and multidisciplinary collaborations work. So hopefully this will complement the skills that you're learning during your research stays and provide you with better capacity to work together in addressing the challenge of climate change. This year's the series will consist of the 3 blocks. The first block will be about science communication, and today's session is opening sessions for that, and we'll go over different approaches and strategies and how to communicate your research and how to insert it into different political processes and make it understood. And then in February, we'll have a thematic week focusing on science communication, which will have sessions on how to write a publishable paper with the 2 editors from Nature Communications. One session on how to do an engaging presentation will be, which will be delivered as a workshop with science communicator from an Australian university. And then we will have also a session that covers science to policy interface and different ways of how science can contribute to political processes. And it will be with Simon Maxwell, who served for 11 years as a director of the Overseas Development Institute in the UK. And also he will be joined by head of knowledge from the NDC partnership hosted by WRI, Amanda McKee. And finally, we will also have one session on telling the story of your research and how to package it into different formats, which will be delivered by two consultants from Cast from Clay. It's a science communications consultancy working with different think tanks. Then in May, we will have a block of 2 sessions devoted to the NDCs and the processes of how they came to be, and also how scientists can contribute to with their research to better, more ambitious NDCs in their countries and also internationally. So we will have these sessions with people and experts who work with NDC in the IPCC and the European Commission, as well as NDC compilers from different countries. And the third block will be devoted to science, international science collaborations. And there we're planning to have sessions that cover and share experience from projects and delivering of large reports like IPCC chapters, which involve over 50 different authors. How does it work? How do you manage such communications? How do you maybe navigate the conflicts that emerge sometimes, and the review processes and deliver the deadlines? And then finally, the last session of the series will be about different career paths that people can undertake after doing a PhD in the area that you are pursuing. So without further ado, to leave enough time for everything, I'm very pleased and excited to introduce Johnathan Schwabish. He is a senior fellow of the Income and Benefits Policy Center and a member of the communication team at the Urban Institute. He specializes in data visualization and science communications. He's also founder of PolicyViz, consulting firm that helps helps people improve their work and how they communicate data. And also Johnathan has recently published a book that's called Elevate the Debate, which I have, and I read it, and that's why Johnathan is here. So without further ado, please, Johnathan, the floor is yours. We can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in. Very excited to chat with you, and excited for this opportunity you have in this program. So as mentioned, I'm going to talk about this book that I edited and co-authored with some of my colleagues at the Urban Institute called Elevate the Debate. And this book, the goal of this book is really to help everyone do a better job of communicating your research, communicating your data, communicating your analysis. And so what I'm going to do, and I'm going to put a link in here for the book webpage, where we have a number of different resources and worksheets and whatnot. And what I'm going to do, I'm not really going to try to sell you the book. I'm just going to go through sort of the high points in the book. So hopefully by the end of this session, the next 30 minutes or so, you'll have some tangible, practical things that you can take away and apply to your work as you think about communicating that work out to your audiences and your stakeholders. Before I get into the specific lessons, let me sort of frame this entire discussion with a quick story of a particular project that we did at the Urban Institute. So back in the end of 2018, which I know feels like a lifetime ago, but this is sort of my favorite example of this. In the end of 2018 here in the United States, there was a big debate about our decennial census. So our decennial census was in the process of about to get ramped up and started. And so it's a big question. The Donald Trump administration wanted to add a question asking about people's immigration status. And there was a lot of pushback from different sides saying, well, this is really going to depress counts. This is going to distort the results. And so a couple of my colleagues at Urban, Diana Elliott, who you can see pictured here in the bottom right, Rob Santos, who is actually now the head of the US Census Bureau, and a couple of others, got together to see if they could do some estimations of what might happen if these questions were asked on the census, and how might that result in some miscounts across different demographic groups. And so as Urban is usually puts out, we are a nonprofit research institution. We put out this full report. You can see that this is the landing page for that full report. You can see that there's an abstract sitting here. You can go up to the top. You can download the whole PDF. There's the social media buttons, all of those good things. But this wasn't the only thing that we put out. And we didn't put out this report when it was done, because as we went into the end of 2018 into 2019, this question about whether the census should be allowed to ask this question about immigration status was going before the Supreme Court. And we knew that the Supreme Court was going to publish their decision in June of 2019. And so the work was actually completed around March or April of that year. And we just sat on it, and we just waited until we knew that this question, this issue was going to be a point of discussion in the United States. We knew that once the Supreme Court released their decision, that this was going to be a big talking point, a big news story in the United States. And indeed, that's what it turned out to be. But we didn't just have this full, 60-page PDF report with all the math and all the details and all the estimation and all the simulations. We had a number of other things. We get a big, what we call narrative feature piece, a big data visualization. And this is the top of that data visualization. You can see it has this sort of what I would consider a unique illustration that you definitely would not see at a lot of nonprofit research institutions in the United States, the sort of custom illustration. And then as you scroll down on this particular page, you see the estimations presented in this visual way. So what we have here is what's called the tiled grid map. So that's a map of the United States, but each state is presented as a similarly sized square. And then within each of those squares, we have these different simulations, what would happen, high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And so the user could go in and click and hover in each of the states, and then they could go down into this table here and play around with some of the estimations. Then you see below that we have a bunch of text, just a short story, and then there's two buttons: download the data and read the report. And both of those are going to lead you back to the full report or to the full data set where you can go download it and explore it in more detail. Now, we didn't just have this. We also had a series of blogs that the authors wrote. So this came out in March of 2019, so still a couple of months away from when the full report and the full feature data visualization was going to be published. Even later in the year, in November, Rob would write another report about the work that they did months earlier. But this story, this piece, was picked up everywhere. It was one of our most highly published in the media pieces that we've had. So this is from just a sample of examples. This is from 2019. I'm just going to pause for a minute and see if other folks can see my screen. I see there's one question that someone can't see my screen. So I'm going to pause and make sure that folks can see my screen. And maybe someone can just let me know that others can see it. All right, so I'm going to, okay, great. Okay, so hopefully you can fix your text, your tech issues. So hopefully others can see it as well. So I'm just going to show you a sampling of media pieces that came out about this. This is from the Washington Post in July. This is from the AP in 2019. This is from Vox in 2019, in June. These are all in June. City Lab. All these different places picked this up. And then we also had a social media effort behind this. So we had a number of social tweets. As you can see, one example here, again, picking up that illustration, that highly visual, highly visible, colorful visualization that really pops off the tweet that you can pick up. We also, the authors were quoted in so many different articles, and this one from the New York Times. And so you can see that this piece really had all of these different products. We had the full report, we had an interactive data visualization, and we had a social media presence as well, along with the authors writing blog posts, doing interviews with media, not just at the national level, but also at the local level. And so the way we think about producing this work at the Urban Institute is we think about all of the different ways that we can reach all of our different audiences, because so many of us who are researchers think that, well, if I just put out my report, everybody's going to read it. And that's just not the case. And so the way we model this, the way we think about this, is with two pyramids, two triangles. And the first triangle, the first pyramid here, is what we call our depth of research pyramid. And so at the very bottom of this depth of research pyramid are the technical reports with all the methodological details, all the math, all the equations, all the appendix tables. These are the white papers. These are the working papers. These are all those in-depth details that, you know, most of us on this call really enjoy reading, but that is certainly not the case for, I would say, most people around the world really don't care about the structure of your error term. They just want to know whether this thing is related to this other thing. As we move up this pyramid, we start to move away from those the in-depth math and the in-depth methodology. So we go into peer-reviewed journal articles where maybe we don't include all 6 appendix tables and all of the dirty math and all of the data pieces. We move further up, and we have congressional testimony, both oral and written testimony. The written testimony might be 20 pages, and the oral testimony may take 4 or 5 minutes. We have policy briefs and fact sheets. So now we might be thinking about practitioners on the ground, or state and local policymakers, or staff members of those policymakers. We also have host roundtables. Back in the world pre-COVID, when we can be in person, we have roundtables and policy convenings. We would have exchanges with advocates and different practitioners. Our researchers are encouraged to write op-eds and commentaries for newspapers, for magazines, for different blogs. We also have our own set of blog posts, our own set of blogs on the Urban Institute website and associated websites. We have web features and data visualizations. I just showed you one example. Then we also encourage our researchers to talk to members of the media, to do interviews. And then at the very top, we have social media, where we might have a 280 character tweet, Instagram post, Facebook post, something on LinkedIn. So that's this depth of research. So you can see at the very top, we have social media, which is very far away from those technologically dense reports with all of the math and all the details. But you can see that it's rooted all the way down into those in-depth reports, and it sits on that base. It stands on top of that. And so what we put next to this is another pyramid that we turn upside down, and we call that the size of the audience pyramid. And this probably doesn't surprise anybody on this call that, you get 6 people to read the working paper, the white paper. You get, let's face it, 8 people to read that journal article. But as we move up the depth of research pyramid, we broaden our audience, where we can reach, thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people with that good social media tweet that's rooting itself all the way back to the in-depth research. So when we talk to our researchers about talking to members of the media, about writing a 600-word blog post, about coming up with a good social media campaign, we are not forcing them to dumb things down or to talk to a lay audience or to simplify things. We are talking to them and encouraging them to think about a wider audience, because at the end of the day, anybody can get all the way down this depth of research pyramid into those in-depth reports, find the data, find the transparent methodologies, so that people can trust and know our work. And so at the end of the day, it's really up to us as researchers, as analysts, as people working with data, collecting data, analyzing data, and obviously communicating data, to make sure that those facts matter and to make them count. And so that's really the theme, the underlying theme of this book, that as researchers, we have a lot of power and an opportunity really to try to get our message out to more and more people and to more and more organizations. So I'm going to quickly just give you what I think is sort of the highlight from each of the 8 chapters in the book. And again, my goal here is to empower you when you go back to your desk after this call tomorrow morning, for the next month, for the next year, when you go back to your work, to consider some of these practical steps that you can take to help your research reach that wider audience, to have a greater impact with your users, your readers, your stakeholders, and the policymakers in and around your area, your region, your country. Okay, so chapter 1 really sets the tone for the entire product. And what we really do here is set what I think are the 4 main themes or through lines that come through each of the chapters in the book. And so just want to talk about these really quickly. So the first theme, the first thought here is to meet people where they are. Okay. And if we go back to that pyramid, if you think about that pyramid, the people who are reading the white paper or the journal article, it's a very different type of audience than people who are reading the blog post, reading the interview in the newspaper article, who are reading the tweet or the Facebook post. They're just 2 very different audiences. And so what we need to do as researchers, and we just tend to forget this, is but to keep in mind that not everybody is an expert in the methodology or in the topic or in the data that we're presenting to them. So we need to meet people where they are. We need to get to them. And again, this is not about dumbing things down or talking to a lay audience. It's about meeting people where they are so that we can help them better understand our content and then implement that work into their practice. The second practice or philosophy here is to be strategic. And again, this is something that researchers are really not good at. Many of us just think we write our report, we put it out, and people are just going to use it, get it, and use it and read it, and that's it. And that's really not true. We need to be strategic with how we are going to put our work out there. We need to think about the audiences that we're targeting and how they can use specific pieces of the work. We need to think about the different products that we might create. Again, going back to that Census Bureau example, from the long in-depth research report to the data visualization, to the social media, maybe to presentations, maybe to a media interview or a blog post or an op-ed. The third theme is to be your own translator as a researcher. Every product that you produce, you should be thinking about, how am I going to get this into the hands of people who can use it? And how am I going to make it so that they understand it? Remember, not everybody has a PhD in statistics or economics or mathematics. Not everybody has seen a scatter plot before. Not everybody is familiar with the content as you have been over the last week, month, year, 5 years if you've been researching your work. So we need to be our own translators as researchers. And finally, use every tool at your disposal, particularly in the data visualization field, where so many people tell me that Excel makes bad visualizations and PowerPoint gives bad presentations. Neither of those is true. They're just tools. And so use whatever tool that you can to create the best product, to make your life as easy as possible, to make it as seamless as possible, to reach as many people as you can. So there's not a specific tool that really solves all of these challenges and all these procedures and policies and things that we need to communicate our work. So use every tool, and it doesn't matter if it's for data visualization, for presentations, for writing blogs, creating websites, whatever it is, use whatever tool is going to work best for you. And I should say your organization. Okay, so the second chapter, and we sort of introduced those through lines, those themes, is about developing an outreach strategy for your different audiences. And again, strategy is such an important part of effectively communicating your work. One lesson I want to give to you here is this word policymakers. At least here in the United States, when I talk to a lot of my colleagues about, who do you want to read your report, or who are you targeting? Who's your target audience? And they'll say policymakers. And I'll say, okay, well, specifically, who are the policymakers that you're thinking about? And far more often than not, they'll mention someone from Capitol Hill, someone in the US Senate, someone in the US House of Representatives, the federal legislators. But we should keep in mind that probably most policy and politics gets done at the local level. So while you might want the head of Parliament or Congress or the Senate or the president or the prime minister to take your work and implement it, more likely than not, it's the chief of staff of the state or regional office that's going to be the person who's going to be able to use and implement your work. So don't think about policymakers necessarily at the federal level. Think about them throughout the entire government. And we also think about conceptualizing our audience. So I'm going to describe this diagram for you. So this diagram has 2 axes. Along the horizontal axis is what we call the strength of the relationship. So we go from low to high. And along the vertical axis is the influence of those individuals, again, going from low to high. So let me start in the pink area here, in the bottom right part of the bottom right quadrant of this graphic. So here, these are what we call our fans, okay? So we have a strong relationship with these people, but they have low influence. So I might think about, you know, my parents, for example, right? My parents are big fans of my work. They don't have a huge social media presence, right? They're not the ones who are gonna get my work in front of, you know, the people that I need it to get in front of, okay? But that's fine. Now we have in the yellow area, these are the folks we don't have a strong relationship with. They don't have a lot of influence. You might think these just kind of strangers on Twitter or Facebook. You don't really know them, and they don't have a lot of influence. We're really not going to worry about them so much. Now the gray folks up at the top left, these are the folks that we don't have a strong relationship with, but have a very high influence, very large influence. I like to think of this as like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? So Neil deGrasse Tyson, world famous astrophysicist. He's amazing. I don't know the man, but he has a lot of influence, right? So I don't have a relationship with him. I'm on the far left of the horizontal axis, but he is on the very top of this influence scale, the vertical axis scale. Now on the top right, these are the key stakeholders, and we color these in blue. Urban's core color is blue, so we call these our blues. And so these key stakeholders, we have a strong relationship with, and they have a lot of influence. So if I was best friends with Neil deGrasse Tyson, he would be one of our blues. And so what we're always trying to do is move our grays into our blues, right? The people that we don't have a connection with, that we don't have a relationship, we are working with them, we are connecting with them, we are providing them with information and data and resources that they can use so that we can move them, inch them to the right along this horizontal axis so that they become one of our blues and they become our fans and they also have high influence. So as you think about communicating your work, think about where your audience sits and think about how you might be able to move some of those audience members along the right part of this axis where you have a stronger relationship with them, where they can promote and share your work. So the next two parts of the book are the sections that I authored. First is on data visualization. And the one thing I want to tell you here is to use active titles in all of your graphs and your charts and your diagrams, because far too many of us, we write our titles where we're just describing what's going on in the graph. Okay, we don't actually tell people what they're supposed to get out of the graph. Just give you one example here. This is a very simple, obviously simple line chart from the Pew Research Center. Notice the title here. Labor force participation rate has risen for women, fallen for men. And that's a great title, right? It's a simple graph, but the title here tells you exactly what you're supposed to get out of this graph, as opposed to any default title that most researchers would write be something like labor force participation rate, comma, men and women, comma, 1950 to 2016. Both are true. Only the first one tells me what I'm supposed to learn from this particular graph. And a lot of folks push back on this and say, well, if I write this active title rather than this, what you see in front of you, this descriptive title, people might think that I'm not being objective or being partisan. But I would tell you 99 times out of 100, that same person has written in their report, in figure 1, you can see that the labor force participation rate for men has gone down and for women it's gone up, and they move on to the next thing. And so my argument here is that what you write in the text, what you show in the graphs, and the text that you put in the graphs should be more closely linked than many of us often do. Why do I think this is important? Because there's evidence that when people read graphs, they read titles. What you see here are results from a study by a team out of Harvard. And what they did was they sat a bunch of study participants down in front of a computer and asked them to look and talk about some graphs that they saw. And the computer was hooked up to a webcam, and the webcam was hooked up to eye tracking software. And so the eye tracking software literally follows their eyes as they look around the screen. And so what you see here are 5 graphs for 2 different people looking at these different graphs. And so those yellow white areas are where they spent the most amount of time in each of those graphs. And if you sort of look around here, what you can see is people spent a lot of time looking at the text, reading the text in and around the graphs. And so when the study team then interviewed the people that were looking at the graphs, this is what they found, that text elements were mentioned far more often than descriptions of the graphs. So the title, for example, was mentioned far, far, far more often than any other parts in the graphs, followed by the label, followed by the paragraphs inside and outside the graph. And then only to the fourth most common thing do we get to the plot itself. So the evidence here suggests that people, readers of our graphs, are very likely to read and try to understand the titles in our graphs. And so if that's true, then we want to make those titles active. We want to tell people what they're supposed to get out of those visualizations. The next section here is on presentations. And again, I'm going to give you one little tip here. Don't do the following when you're giving a presentation. Don't end your presentation on this slide. There is no reason for you to end your presentation on a slide that says thank you, or any questions, or just questions, or this slide. It's a wasted opportunity, right? You end your talk, there's 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 30 minutes for Q&A, and the thing that people are going to look at is a slide that tells them nothing about your message, about what you want them to do with the information you just gave them. So instead of ending your presentation with a slide like this, where again, all you need to say is thank you, what questions do you have? You don't need to put it on a slide. Instead, put up your headline message, put up the most important thing, the thing that you want people to take away, the thing that you want people to do with the content that you just provided to them, instead of this unnecessary slide, this unnecessary text that really just repeats something that you can say very quickly. Okay, so now we've talked about identifying your audience, good data visualizations, good presentations. What about blogging? The thing about blogging is it's a very different form of reading than when we sit down and read a book. People are much more likely to scan blogs, and they're obviously much more likely to read them on a computer than they are in paper, much less likely to dive into all the details. And so what's can be very helpful here is to write in a headline approach. So let me show you this headline. I'm going to give you a moment just to read this headline for a draft blog post at Urban. So you can see here, this is a long title. This is a long title. It's a long title for a report, for a paper, long title, especially long title for a blog. It's got that sort of terrible pun right at the beginning. It's just a long title. And now look at this title. You can see that this title on the right, it's much more concise, much more active. It gets you right to the point instead of sort of, stretching it all the way out. And so when you think about writing blogs, think about this headline approach. Think about making it more visual and think about getting people right to the point right away. Okay, when it comes to working with the media, and I will be honest, I am not a huge fan of talking to members of the media. It's just not something that I particularly enjoy. But this is the one thing, this is the big thing I think that I learned from Urban's media team when I took media training, which is always answer the last question. The last question from any good reporter is going to be, do you have anything else to add? Anything else you'd like to mention? The answer to that is always yes. You always want to answer that question yes, and then add something, obviously, because the reason is because that will afford you the opportunity maybe to correct something you didn't say earlier. Maybe there's something that you left out that you want to make sure that the reporter knows, or maybe now that you've warmed up, you've done a 20-minute interview with someone, you sort of got the right words down. Maybe you can respond to a question you already answered in a more concise, active, better way so that they can actually use it in the news article. So the answer to the last question is always yes. And then you can come up with anything that you want, but answer that last question with an affirmative, and then repeat some of that information or couch it in a different way, or make the correction if you need to. As I mentioned earlier, we have worksheets for every chapter in the book, and I put the link in the chat window earlier. I'll put it here again, so you have it. They're all free. They're in Word format and PDF format, so you can download them, you can edit them, you can print them out, you can do whatever you want with them. The points of these checklists, of these worksheets, is to help you on your way to better communication of your work and your research. When it comes to social media, I mean, probably at this point, most people on this call have some sort of social media presence. But if you have a social media presence that you have been using primarily for personal purposes, so maybe your Facebook page has been personal, maybe your Twitter account has been something like this, or something like this. It's been, been about baseball, or it's been about something fun. It's been about music, and that's fine. But if you are now going to create a new account or a new platform, or you're going to change your platform to be more professional, you want to obviously change the images in your visuals. So this is from a friend of mine who runs this baseball Twitter account. It's not intended for professional work. But what you want to do when you do that is to build your content first, because then when people come to your page, they know what they're supposed to get out of it. And I'll give you the story that our head of digital at Urban has told me several times. He received an email once from another nonprofit in our space, and the email said, "Hey, the president of our organization is now on Twitter. You can go get lots of content from this person's Twitter feed. They're going to be putting lots of stuff out." And so my friend clicks on the link, goes to the Twitter page, and doesn't find anything. There are no tweets, very few tweets, nothing really of use. And so my friend didn't end up following the president of this particular nonprofit, because there's no reason to follow that person if there's no content, right? You need to show people what they're going to get by taking time out of their day and coming over to your Twitter profile, your Instagram feed, your Facebook page, whatever it is. So there's lots of other things to consider, obviously, with social media, and my colleague writes more about that in the book. But just to say, as you are thinking about creating your professional social media presence, add content first, and then start following people, and then start to attract people. You don't want people to come to a blank Twitter feed or Instagram feed, or a feed that is personal rather than professional. You want to build that up so that when people come to your landing page, that they know what they're going to get, what sort of content they're going to get from following you. Finally, let's put it all together. We come back to having a strategy for what we're going to produce, how we're going to produce it, and who we're going to produce it for. And again, there's a worksheet on that site. I'm going to walk through this very quickly. And none of this in this worksheet is really rocket science, but it's just prompting you, sort of requiring you to think about these questions, to answer these questions, so you can be more successful in the end. So on the first page on the left, identify your key audiences. Who are you trying to reach? Are you trying to reach funders? Are you trying to reach other researchers? Are you trying to reach policymakers? Are you trying to reach people in the private sector? Who are you trying to reach? And write them down and rank them in the importance of who you want to reach. What do you want them to do with your work? Do you want them to implement a policy? Do you want them to fund more of your research? Do you want them to give you some data? What do you want them to do with your work once they have it in their hands? Plan your timeline, right? You might start, let's just say January 1st, coming up in a few weeks. You start January 1st on a new project. You think your project is going to take you 6 months to finish. And maybe let's just take something simple here. It's going to be on the economic impact of the Thanksgiving holiday here in the United States. That's the work that you're going to do. And you think it's going to take you 6 months to produce, or 7 months to produce. Well, now you're in August. What you might want to do is hold on to that work until until November, because that's when people are going to be talking about the particular topic. So as you can plan your work, you can think about, are there particular events? Are there particular times of the year that your work might be more applicable and more likely to be covered in the news? On the next page, on the right page, write down your key messages, right? What do you want? What is your headline message that people are going to notice? They are going to read. What is new? What is different? What is a surprise about your work that's going to catch people's attention? What are your channels and your tactics that you're going to use? And you can see here we have a little grid, right? A separate row for each audience, because for the researcher community, you might need to give them the 35-page PDF. For the practitioner community, maybe they just need that 1 or 2 page fact sheet. For the media, maybe you just need to give them the 600 or 800 word blog post. So thinking about each of these different audiences and how you're going to get your material in front of them. And then prepare your messengers. Are there people? Are there other researchers, colleagues, managers, thought leaders, influencers who can help you get your message out there? And what can you prepare to help them, right? I'm not going to send to Neil deGrasse Tyson a 40-page PDF economics article with math and equations in there Neil deGrasse Tyson, if I'm calling him from out of the blue, is going to want to know in 20 seconds why he should be sharing my work. And at the end, and I'll say that we tend not to do this enough. And when I say we, I really mean all of us, including those of us, including at Urban, but I would say everywhere. Evaluate it at the end. Was it successful? Did you target the right audience? Did you give them the right things that they could use that? And targeting or evaluating doesn't have to be quantitative. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be things like page views and time on page or downloads or social media likes or retweets, which are all useful. But it can also be qualitative. What did you hear from stakeholders that they liked about the work, that they used about the work? They were able to implement the thing that you suggested, and this other thing happened. So this simple worksheet, there are many others on, at least one for each chapter, are there for your use in a day-to-day situation, so that you can plan out your research and strategize to make it successful. So again, I'm going to put that website up here. It's in the chat window. Again, all the resources are on the website. You can follow me on social media at Schwabish, and follow the Urban Institute at Urban Institute on all of our social media platforms. And I will stop there, and looking forward to your questions and to have a little conversation. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, John. That was really insightful, and I learned a lot, and I have deleted the thank you, any questions slide from my presentation while you were speaking. Once again, everyone, if you have any questions, please start posting them in the Q&A section of the Zoom interface. We hope to have plenty of them and a discussion with Johnathan. And while we are waiting for questions from you, I think I just wanted to ask John, in your graph, you mentioned this gray and blue folks, but I'm wondering, could you expand a bit on the strategies of how actually do you move people from gray to blue? Maybe you can share some tips with us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So there are a lot of different strategies, and we have our own team who does a lot of this outreach. And so what we try to do is, first off, we try to identify who these people are, right? So who is the person? I'll go back to folks thinking that their target audience is well, I'll just make it simple, right? That their target audience is the president of the United States. The president of the United States is never going to read your research, right? And also your research is probably best used by the mayor of your city, or probably even more specifically, the chief of staff of the mayor of the city. So how do you get that information to that person? And so we use all of our channels. We use people that we already have an existing relationship with and say, hey, do you know, right? We use our existing blues to say, do you know others who we should be reaching out to? So that we can connect with them. One of the other channels I didn't mention today is our newsletter. Newsletters are a big deal these days. We have a lot of newsletters that go out. We've also found that, at least in the United States, that people are most likely to open the newsletters between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning. So we have newsletters. We're very, very targeted about that, and we're very careful about that. And I know in other parts of the world, there are additional considerations around privacy and security. In Europe, it's GDPR. But we try to, there's no law here in the United States like GDPR, but we try to essentially follow the spirit of that law, because we don't want to, it's just like we don't want to make people angry, right? Like, that's the worst thing you could do. So like, if we go back to a presentation, like, one of the worst things you can do as a presenter is to go over your time, right? Like, you keep people late. Like when you keep people late, they're all angry with you for having kept them late. So that's like one thing that you want to avoid. And so just like as a basic thing, like, try not to make people angry that you're trying to get them to help you with. So, and then I'll just say one other thing is that, a lot of this relationship building is kind of what I would call like a slow burn, right? Like it can take a long time. It's not like you immediately, even if you finally connect with someone and they write you back, right? So let's just take Neil deGrasse Tyson. Like, I don't know why I always come back to Neil deGrasse Tyson. Everybody knows him and everybody loves him. So if I send something to Neil deGrasse Tyson and he wrote me back and said, oh, thanks for sending this to me, it doesn't mean that I have that immediate connection and he's always going to share my stuff and he's always going to be my fan, right? I need to sort of build that relationship over time. And so a lot of this can take time, and I don't know about you all, but I'm not a particularly patient person. So it can take a lot of patience to sort of figure this out and build those relationships.
Okay, thank you for that response. I also, while we're waiting for more questions, I'm wondering if you could share perhaps any more information about data visualizations and how to work with them. How do you work with them? What are the best approaches and tools? I think that would be very useful for our participants today.
You mean in terms of tools that people use?
Yeah, maybe different tools, but also I think in your book you have a lot of great tips on like even colors and structures, because I think a lot of times the same information can be presented in two different ways, and in one way people clearly understand it and another one they don't. But also, of course, different tools I think would be interesting to look at as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I just like locked my computer. Let me get back. There we go. So I'll put in the chat window, my latest book is on data visualization. So this is Better Data Visualization. So that's my latest book. So there are obviously a lot of techniques and strategies to create effective visualizations. A lot of it comes back to just knowing your audience, right? That some audiences don't know how to read a scatter plot. Some audiences are tired of reading bar charts. So you just need to, again, know your audience. It's probably the most important thing I can tell you. When it comes to tools, I will say that, I use lots of different tools in my data viz workflow. I will say that I'm primarily an Excel user, and lots of people are kind of shocked by that. They don't think that you can create good visualizations in Excel. I sort of obviously fundamentally disagree with that. You can create lots of great things in Excel as long as you sort of can figure out how to hack away at it and push the boundaries a little bit. I also use R a lot, the R programming language. I should probably put some of these in the chat window. Might be useful. If you know how to code and you are sorry, I'm just trying to find some links here, and you're a researcher, you might be familiar with like things like Stata and SAS and SPSS. R is really not that far of a leap. It's a different syntax, obviously, so it takes some time to learn. So I use R. Another tool that I use, I'm probably doing these in order of my sort of distribution here, is Tableau. Tableau is a dashboarding tool. I will say Tableau is quite expensive. So that's, I say, one of the big downsides of Tableau, but it's one of the more popular dashboarding tools out there. If you are at a university, many universities, not all, many universities will offer it for free. Tableau does have a nice education program. The other tool is Power BI, which is Microsoft's dashboarding tool. I think it's gotten a lot more popular over the last couple of years, primarily because it just comes with the Microsoft suite, which everybody has. So I like Power BI. I can't say I really use it that much anymore, but it is a nice tool. And let me mention two others, and I see there's a question in there. So two others that are browser based that I like. Data Wrapper is a really nice one, and I'm going to put one more in there. So Data Wrapper and Flourish. So Data Wrapper is based out of Germany, and Flourish, I think, out of the UK, possibly. Both of these tools are browser based, and they have a variety of different, pricing usage things. Yeah, I think Flourish is out of London. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions. So the question about the tools, I just put all the links in the chat window, so you should be able to click on them and check those out. And I will share the link to my book again to both of them in the chat window. But for Data Wrapper and Flourish, they both have free versions. I use the free versions of both of them. it's the way the world works now, right? You sort of get it up to some point and then you have to pay. I use the free versions of both. I think they're both very good. I will just caution you that because they are browser based, especially if you're using the free version, when you put your data into these tools, it goes up to their servers. So you want to be careful about that, because obviously, if you have there's privacy concerns or security concerns with your data, you probably don't want to be putting them up in the browser like that. And I'm just going to put some of my books in here. Oh, am I not sharing? Oh, I'm only sharing to, oh, my bad. I'm sorry. I was only sharing to panelists. Let me redo those. So I
can do that, John. Don't worry. I can just.
Oh, there we go. Sadie just did it. Thank you, Sadie. Okay, so those are all the tools that I put in. My bad. I will now change the link. And they put two other things in there. These are my other books, Better Presentations on Presentation Skills. And then here's the link for Amazon, at least for Elevate the Debate. So I guess we should turn to the questions.
Yes, great. That would be great. So we have a question from, and I apologize if I don't pronounce your name correctly, Duhadur Rahman. And he's asking, what would be the strategy to communicate science to people who have limited education and don't necessarily have access to formal or informal communication tools? And I think it might be, a lot of target audience for the science on agricultural greenhouse gas emissions is farmers and farmer cooperatives. So right. Just for you to, I think, have in mind that approximately that audience.
That's a great question. When I'm trying to load up in my browser here, so you may have heard of Hans Rosling. I am going to, I don't know the best way to, well, you know what I'll do? Maybe I'll share my screen here. So this is Hans Rosling. Can you see my browser, my Chrome window?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling unfortunately passed away in 2017, but Hans Rosling's given one of the best TED Talks I've ever seen. He has a number of other smaller TED Talks, I would sort of call smaller TED Talks. They're like he has 1 minute and 2 minute ones. And what Rosling was so good at was communicating information in an engaging way and not always necessarily using computers. So you can see, I won't play this here, but I will. You can see here in this TED Talk, he's using boxes, right? Like he's literally stacking boxes on top. I'm going to talk about inequality. He has another one. He's using rocks, I believe. There's another one where he's like outside. I wish I could find it. Let me see if I can find it. Shortest TED Talk, I believe is what they call it. This one. I'll put this one in this one is great. So this is how he talks about, let me pause that. This one, he talks about inequality. And that's that one. So I would say, so just, Google Hans Rosling. So all of the examples of Rosling will be super useful, I think, in that sense. The other thing to keep in mind is to go back to the audience example. So there's a somewhat famous example, and I'm going to get the story wrong, so I apologize in advance, but there's a somewhat famous story of a group of researchers, I believe based in the United States, trying to come up with a toilet or I think it was a stove for people in India, I believe, for low-income people in India. And they didn't design the tool with the people who are going to use it in mind. So as I recall, it was too big, it was too expensive, it was too smoky. And so when it comes to these communicating these different concepts to people, always keep in mind, as the person mentioned here, always keep in mind who you're trying to communicate with. So, like was mentioned here, well, I'll make it simple. there are a lot of people who don't have access to broadband internet. And so when you see these really big interactive data visualizations with things swooping around and there's lots of stuff going on, not everybody can access that because not everybody has broadband internet connection. And so at a basic level, what you think might be a great dashboard or a great visualization people might not actually be able to look at that thing because they can't load it on their phone. And even if they could load it on their phone, it's going to be so expensive or so slow that it's not going to be worth their time or their effort or their money, right? So to sort of come back to the core of this question, there are lots of ways that we can communicate information that don't rely necessarily on technology, right? Think about, I'll give you an example that I've done. I've tried teaching data visualization to kids at my kids' elementary school. And so we've used a couple of different drawing exercises and a card game that I have to learn about data visualizations a simple way. So it doesn't always have to be technology driven. We can be drawing driven. It can be using things in practice, rocks and boxes and colored markers and things like that. And I'll put one more link in the chat window as we go to that next question.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
No problem.
One more question is, and I think that's a very good question. What is the indicator that our research has reached the target audience?
That's a really good question. And, you know, one of the ways that you can help figure that out is to, like I mentioned earlier, is to build those bridges and to build that relationship so that when you get that information to people, that they will tell you, oh, we were able to use the thing that the policy that you recommended or the thing that we put in place. I've been doing a lot of work recently on racial equity and language in data visualization based on a report that I'll grab and share. And, you know, every time I do a talk, you know, one thing I ask people for is, hey, you know, if you're using this in your work, if you're changing the way that you are doing this, please let me know. And there's nothing wrong for asking for those examples of how people are using your research. But again, if you come up with a strategy, you'll be better able to track how people are using it, right? As opposed to saying, I wrote this 30-page report, I put it on my website, and I can track page views and I can track downloads, which is of limited use because you don't know who is downloading it. You don't know how they're using it. So if you can have a more targeted approach by saying, hey, I want to make sure that such and such a group, right? There's, I don't know, come up with something. There's a nonprofit group working on irrigation strategies in this particular region of our country. Okay, that's the group, that's what they do. Well, let's get this report into their hands. Let's make sure we connect with them and then they have it. And then we can check in with them to see if, oh, did that work? Was that helpful to you? What else can we provide to you? So it is building those relationships and targeting those particular audiences so that you can know whether and how people are using your content and your work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And one more question from Dabire. And I think that you kind of touched on that, but the question is, what is the best strategy to communicate your science with policymakers?
Yeah, so again, this is another tough one, right? And I think the key thing to keep in mind, so let's just communicate science to, let's instead of say policymakers, let's say non-scientists. So we'll just broaden the bubble here a little bit. Keep in mind that non-scientists don't necessarily speak the language that you speak as a scientist. They don't necessarily know the jargon that you use in your field. They haven't necessarily seen the visualizations, the graphs or the charts or the diagrams that you find intuitive and innate and are used consistently in your field. For example, when I go every once in a while, I'll go scroll through some biology literature just to see what sort of graphs they're using. I don't understand half of what they're showing, right? Like I don't know what they're showing, but for a biologist, it's probably super simple. Oh, I'll give you a really good one because I just wrote a blog post about this. over the weekend, my daughter broke her arm. Unfortunately, she was ice skating. She fell, she broke her arm. And I took her to the urgent care to get an x-ray done. And I was in the x-ray room when they were doing it. And I was standing in the back looking at the computer as the x-rays are coming in. And I'm like leaning in really closely and I don't see any break, right? I'm sort of looking for like the bone to look like that, right? I don't see anything. And as she and I are walking back to the examination room, I said, well, I didn't see a break. So maybe you didn't break it. It'd be great. The doctor comes in and he examines her and he says, all right, well, let's look at the x-rays. He double clicks, and before it's even fully opened on the thing, he's like, yep, that's broken. Like he knew it immediately, right? And he had to explain it to us where the break was. He had to show it to us, right? And so for any other emergency room or any other doctor, reading an x-ray like that is second nature. It's almost instantaneous. They don't have to think about it. But that's not the case for those of us who don't do that every day. And so when you think about communicating your science to people who are not scientists, think about the strategies and the things that you might need to include in your visuals, in your text, in your reports to help explain not just the content, right? Not that in this scatter plot, this bubble is over here and we need to do X, Y, and Z, but maybe you need to explain how do you read this bubble plot or this scatter plot, you know, that along the x-axis, when you go off to the right, that's getting bigger. When you go to the left, that's getting smaller. You might need to explain how to read the graph before you can get them to the content.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. I personally always train on my partner who has nothing to do with research. If he doesn't understand, he asks me questions, then I know where I can improve. And then while we have a bit more time, I'm going to have one more question for myself.
Sure.
So you mentioned a bit about blogging, and I'm wondering where does the blogging stand? Some people are saying that blogging is kind of a bit becoming a thing of the past, that everybody's switching to this TikTok videos, you know, and so I'm wondering why to blog? Does it still worth to blog about science? And yeah, maybe a couple of tips on what are the best ways of blogging about science.
That's a great question. I mean, I will say that I am not on TikTok. So my daughter will come over here and roll her eyes at me because I'm not on TikTok. She's rolling her eyes at me right now. I can see her. We're talking about whether scientists should be on TikTok or not. Who? Researchers and scientists should be on TikTok. Oh. She's just rolling her eyes at me. So I'll say this. I think blogs are still useful. So there's a number of ways to think about it. And I'm probably not the best person to answer this question, but I'll give my shot. One way to think about it is you've written your research report, you've written a 30-page paper. Maybe there's a smaller incidental finding that you weren't able to focus on in the paper, or maybe there's something else that you didn't include in the paper for whatever reason, or maybe there's a special hook that you can use to get people's attention and then push them towards the full paper, right? So you can think of a blog as really like advertising for the full work. I think, and again, I don't have the web metrics in front of me, but I'm mostly sure that our blog traffic on the Urban website is much higher than report traffic gets. There's a somewhat infamous, I would say, study of the World Bank Library where 90 some odd % of all PDFs had never been opened from the World Bank website. I mean, that is just sort of astounding and sad. But so is TikTok the right solution? Again, I'm not a TikTok user. I would say video is it's just not my thing personally, but there are a lot of people doing a lot of cool stuff. I'll mention one guy that I like. He's an economist. Oops, I keep pressing the wrong button. I keep locking my computer. So Dr. A, let me see if I can just find him real quick. Yes, so Dr. Abdullah Bahrani has a really nice YouTube channel. It's about economics, so it might not be your thing. But I will say, like, the way I sort of go about it is I try to use as many of these tools as I can, and I can sort of focus on without being overwhelmed. So I'm primarily a Twitter user, and I do a little bit of Instagram. I don't really do Facebook at all. Certainly don't do TikTok. So I don't think blogging is dead. I think it's a great way to connect with people. You might know about Medium. .com, which is sort of the world there is to write longer blog posts. I think in our world, the urban world, we try to target between 600 and 800 words. So they're generally shorter, which I'll also say is a big challenge for researchers, because we are not used to leaving out the details and the subtlety and the nuance of all the things about the data, right? We're not really used to doing that. We want to make sure that everybody knows, well, I don't know about you all, so I'll just stay from an economist perspective. I use the logit model instead of the probit model because of X, Y, and Z. Nobody cares in a blog post, right? So that's really, I think, the biggest challenge is it's writing in a different way. It's writing for that wider audience. So I don't think it's dead. Maybe one day it will be. I guess I'll add one more thing, is that what I've seen more recently, so it doesn't mean this is more recent, it's just I've sort of come upon it, is there are lots of major journals that have like a blog associated with them. So like the Lancet in the medical field, like the Lancet and Health Affairs, they have blogs that get a ton of traffic because you can have people who are writing for a more general audience. Maybe the pieces are a little more opinionated rather than scientific, so they can have more, because you can have more of an opinion on a blog as opposed to having to sort of be objective. In a research paper, you might be able to have more of a perspective, more of a an opinionated perspective in a blog post. So like I said, I don't believe they're dead, but I think it's also probably sector to sector and field to field how popular they are. And I mean, one day we'll all be wearing virtual reality goggles, maybe. I don't know what the next thing is, but we'll see. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, John, for this amazing, incredibly insightful talk and a conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope that everybody else did it as much as I did. This is all the time that we have for today. And we will share the recording with everybody and all the links from the chat. Hopefully John will be kind enough to share his slides as well. And I will also send through an invitation to our communication sessions for February. So that's it for today. You all have a great night, day, or morning. Thank you so much for joining us.